Marc Tucker is the head of something called the National Center for Economics and Education, which is a sort of a think tank operation that puts out policy documents related to education reform. What I was responding to was a report that he had issued, calling for proposing a new accountability system, a model for a new accountability system. It looked like something that was really great because he was very critical of high stakes testing. He called No Child Left Behind a failure, and was quite critical of all the emphasis on testing. But when I looked a little bit more closely at the proposals that he was making, it actually seemed as if high stakes testing continued to be very central to the model that he was proposing. And although he suggested that we reduce the number of tests and increase the quality of tests, he was continuing to place huge stakes on tests, and in fact, in some ways, even increasing the stakes on tests. So for those reasons, I was really concerned about this being offered as some kind of a new alternative to the paradigm that we're in right now, because I think we do really need a change in thinking, and we need to move away from high stakes testing completely. And you don't do that by just reducing the number of tests, or by making better tests, because this is sort of the siren call that we hear every time we complain about high stakes testing. We hear that there are better tests right around the corner, and somehow when they arrive, they don't seem any better. They never seem any better. So I think we're ready to stop playing the better test game with the test makers. The philosophy that we have, which Tucker continues to be associated with, is that education is going to be driven by outcomes, and so there's sort of this that we have to look at outcomes and work our way backwards to improve education. We have to have all these measurement instruments that tell us where the system needs to be improved, and this is central to the Common Core. It's central to No Child Left Behind. Hillary Clinton recently was talking about how upsetting it was that people were critical of the Common Core, and she said, this is how we organize our educational system. And so from this mindset, the way that you work is you create standards, then you create tests to measure the standards, you give them to the students and see how the students did, and then you use that information to adjust instruction. And the problem with that is that it makes the test the central definition of educational excellence. And when you start attaching all these levers of control to the tests, the stakes that are attached, whether they're talking about using Common Core tests as high school graduation tests. They're already using these tests to close down schools. They're using these tests to evaluate teachers. So there's all sorts of ways that these tests become instrumental. The problem is tests do not capture 90% of what we care about. And I say 90% as if that's a definite number, but actually so many of these things are unquantifiable, and that's part of the problem. So it's difficult to even talk in terms, we're not even talking the same language in some ways, because when we conceptualize, I do workshops with teachers around project-based learning. And one of the first things we do is we talk about what it is that you want your students to walk across the stage with. What skills, what qualities do you want them to have as graduates from your school? And we get these great lists, no matter where I go, working with teachers from all over the country. The list is always, could be the same. We want kids who can work together. We want kids who can problem solve. We want kids who are independent thinkers and critical thinkers. We want kids who, and very few of these things. Sometimes somebody will say, well, they should be able to, read and write. They should be able to write well and communicate well. They should be able to do math, but oftentimes those things don't even show up on the list of things that we really care about. And so many of the things that we do care the most about can't be captured on a test. And, we were promised that the Common Core tests were going to somehow be this next generation of assessments. And, and now we're finding that no, it's just more of the same. And they make it more difficult. You can make a test more difficult, and then you can call it rigorous. But that doesn't mean that it's more meaningful. And what students and teachers are looking for is meaning from their education. They're not looking just to make it harder. And so we've confused excellence with difficulty. Difficulty and excellence are not the same thing. I can give you a very, very difficult task. I could ask you to count the tiles in the bathroom, and that would be a difficult task, but that doesn't mean it's worthwhile. Even if you were to use an algorithm and you could problem solve and figure out how to do it efficiently and use some algebra maybe to do it, but that doesn't make it an excellent task. I think it's funny that I think we're seeing a place where people with conservative, libertarian perspectives really value that independent thinking, that we want kids to be thinking for themselves. And what we see is central to the accountability mindset is really a version of authoritarianism, because you have to define, in order to create this whole system of accountability, there has to be defined by some central authority a body of knowledge and a means of measuring that knowledge in order for that whole system to function. And that ultimately is an authoritarian construct. And so I think it's interesting to see where there are conservatives like Jeb Bush who embrace the Common Core, and where there are more libertarians who are conservative, who reject that centralized sort of authoritarian mindset. And I think on the left, there are people who call themselves progressives who are fundamentally authoritarian as well. I mean, look at Michelle Rhee, who makes a big deal about the fact that she's registered a Democrat or something, and she will call herself some kind of progressive, but if you look at the content of what she did in Washington, D.C., very authoritarian. And, similarly with the progressives that have embraced the Common Core and the whole accountability mechanism. What we're seeing is a vision of education in relationship to the economy. And this is something to really think about. When, Marc Tucker's organization is called the Center for Economy and Education, or Education and the Economy, and the idea is that education should serve the economy. And I think some progressives or educators buy into this idea because you want to get businesses to support education. And why should businesses support education? Well, the only reason they'll support it, I suppose, is if it benefits their bottom line in somehow. And so then you end up trying to engineer the education system around the needs of corporations and around the needs of corporate profits. And there's a problem with that in our current economy. There's all this talk about how the economy needs people to be so much better prepared and so on, needs critical thinkers. And then for some reason we create a testing system that declares 2/3 of our students to be not proficient. 70% of the kids are, the Common Core tests are designed to declare 70% of the kids not proficient. So, and the rhetoric is that we're going to prepare everyone for college and career. But the reality is, what we're doing is we're making tests so difficult that only the top 20 or 30% of the students can be labeled ready for college and career. I read a really interesting study from Oxford University which predicts that in the United States in the next 20 years, the workforce will shrink by 47% because of advances in technology. Things like driverless cars, 2 million people in the country work driving vehicles. So when the driverless car comes, is perfected, all those bus drivers, truck drivers, and so on are going to be out of work. So there's this idea that the economy of the future needs all these people who are really highly trained. The reality is the economy of the future actually needs fewer and fewer workers. And so there's, in a sense, what my concern is, are we creating a system that simply ranks and sorts people and tells, and in a sense justifies the unemployment, chronic unemployment for a whole sector of our population that the economy of the future doesn't really have jobs for. And then when they look, are we trying to, in a sense, condition those people to believe that they actually don't deserve jobs or careers because they aren't college and career ready? Because otherwise, why would you create a system that labels 2/3 of the students inadequate and not ready for college and career? So that's the real problem I have with the, when you go to match the rhetoric with the reality of these tests, it doesn't line up. If you want to create college and career, if you want to make colleges accessible for everybody, then why don't you make college free for everybody? Why don't you make college loans affordable? Right now, college students are graduating with huge debts, and nobody is interested in making that. I mean, there's a few people talking about trying to, Elizabeth Warren has talked about why is it that we allow the banks to borrow money at 0% interest, but the U.S. government is actually profiting from loans to students. The Department of Education gets money from the loans that students take out. So why is the U.S. government actually profiting from debt enslavement of the next generation of students? If what our goal is to make college, available to as many people as possible. And, fundamentally, why aren't we looking at how to reshape our economy so that there are jobs, so that there are more jobs? Because I think a lot of people are now graduating from college and finding that in spite of having a bachelor's degree, the jobs that they hoped would be there aren't there. And that's, so I think if we're not really willing to look at how our economy is structured, how wages are set, if we are only set, if what we say is what's good for the economy is what's good for corporate bottom lines, then actually we have an economy that doesn't serve most of our students very well at all. And if we're not capable of challenging that, then, who's the defender of the status quo in this situation? I'm here this weekend with the Network for Public Education, which is one of the organizations that has emerged over the last few years to try to galvanize activists from around the country to support teachers, to support students, to support public schools that are really being increasingly privatized and turned over to vouchers and charters and so on. So connecting with other activists through organizations like the Network for Public Education, like United Opt-out. The opt-out movement has emerged as a huge force in this testing season, to the point that I think it's really going to throw a monkey wrench into the whole data systems. And I don't think the people in charge really know what to do about it. Just last week, Arnie Duncan said that if the states can't control it, the federal government's going to have to do something. So I don't know if there's going to be, what sort of punishments they're going to figure out. But all they seem to be able to do is to offer bribes or punishments. Their imagination doesn't really stretch to what it would take to inspire people and lead in that way. So instead, they're using various modes of coercion. Those are very weak tools, because people don't really move as a people because you threaten them. They just get more ornery. And so I think we're going to see people getting a lot more ornery, and I'm glad for it.